Hi everybody, my name is Pete Navarra. Welcome to this session of the Sitecore Virtual User Group Conference. During this session, we're going to be talking about utilizing forms to trigger goals and identifying contacts in Sitecore 9. What we'll cover is really an introduction to Sitecore Forms. We're going to build a form and actually build a custom submit action. We're also going to give you an introduction to Sitecore xConnect, how to identify contacts, and how to save data to contact facets. We're also going to use goals to trigger personalization, and we're going to do a live demo of all of this. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Pete Navarra. I'm a Sitecore Technology MVP. I'm also a Director of Technical Strategy at ConnectiveDX. I'm experienced in Sitecore for almost 10 years. First certified in Sitecore 5.3, and I got certified in Sitecore 9 in October of this year. I don't know who the lovely, handsome mug is. I think I grew some facial hair there. So during this session, who am I really speaking to? Well, for the most part, I'm speaking to developers. We're going to be dipping into some code. We're going to be looking at that stuff. And the developers are going to get a lot that they're going to be able to take away from this. But I'm also going to be talking to content authors. And really the content authors, even though they're going to phase out when they see the code part of this presentation, they're going to be able to see how to build forms in Sitecore without really the need for a developer to assist them. They're also going to be able to set up a goal in Sitecore and also show how to do personalization on that goal when the form gets completed. But lastly, I'm really going to be talking to product owners as well. While the product owners may not really know that much about the code, they're probably going to know what the content author is doing, but they bridge the gap. And they're going to be able to take a look and see what the effort is between building these forms that really a content author is going to be doing versus some of the customizations that we're going to talk about. The nice thing about Sitecore 9 is, and really Sitecore development in general, is the patterns. When you develop the pattern, and that's what the developers do, then the content authors are able to reuse that pattern over and over again without much of a developer assistance. So who can relate to this? This is the product owner of your website comes to you as a developer. I need a form on our site that we can capture visitor data, save it to our CM, trigger a goal in a marketing campaign, then make sure we show them different things on the homepage. And we want that done tomorrow. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at first, when I first started getting into this, I kind of looked like this guy. Don't be like this guy. Don't freak out, because the reality is what the real ask here is really three things. We're going to create a form. For the most part, the content author is going to be creating that form. We're going to identify a contact. Okay, so the developer is going to write some code that's going to live on a form submit action that's going to identify a contact. Again, the purpose is the content author will be able to reuse that form action over and over again. And lastly, we're going to personalize some components on the web page. We're using the experience editor, create some components, personalize off the goal. So in doing all this, when we're creating a form, the first thing to realize is that we're not using web forms for marketers. If you're used to Sitecore 8.2, that's what it is. We're actually going to be using the new Sitecore 9 forms. We're going to add some fields, first name, last name, email address. We're going to throw some actions on it. We're going to trigger a goal, and we're going to identify a contact. And by the way, we're going to save the first name, last name, email address into our contact profile so that that can be put into the CRM for later use. When we're identifying a contact, the first thing that's important to realize is we're going to be using xConnect. This is a new platform for a lot of developers out there. They're used to just Sitecore being able to work with contacts directly. Now we're going to be using xConnect. We're going to be able to identify the anonymous contact and then save those contact facets fields from the form. And lastly, we're going to personalize off that goal. So the end result really is so that when you're done, the developer and you can go, I'm more like this guy. I know exactly what to do. So Sitecore 9 forms, this is going to be an introduction. This particular session is not meant to be an inclusive look at forms. There's a lot that you can do with it. But what I am going to be able to show you is the building blocks that allow you to poke around and actually use Sitecore Forms yourself. So at a glance, at a glance, Sitecore 8.2 differences. Well, first off, if you're in Sitecore 8.2, really or 1 or 8.0, you're used to using web forms for marketers. Web forms for marketers is an external product that was integrated into the platform. It looks different from the rest of the platform. It has some different technologies that are wrapped around behind it, and sometimes it's not really the most seamless experience that our content authors like to have. Sitecore 9 Forms, on the other hand, is completely part of the Sitecore platform. It's not a module, it's not something you add in. It lives and breathes with the product line. It is nothing like web forms for marketers, although some of the constant authoring activities where you drag a field or set up your form looks very much like web forms for marketers. There's an intuitive look and feel to it. And lastly, it's really going to have a seamless experience with the marketing features that are also built in as part of Sitecore 9. The marketing automation platform really can enable marketers and marketing technologists to take advantage of everything you can glean from a form, put it into a funnel, and do different things with it. Last, we're going to show the enhanced user experience forms designer studio, which you can see on the side here. This is really a completely rebuilt form designer that is built within Sitecore Speak. So in the demo, what you're going to see is we're going to create a form, we're going to add some fields to that form, and we're also going to create or select some submit actions. Now, out of the box, Sitecore 9 ships with a number of out-of-the-box actions. You can see trigger a goal, you can trigger a campaign activity, trigger an outcome, redirect to a page, save data. To me, to fulfill our story that our product owner gave us, we're missing one action, and that's identifying a contact. So I'm going to walk through at a glance how we're going to create this custom submit action. And then once we go through the walkthrough, then we're going to flip over and actually see some of the demo later on in this presentation. So first off, Sitecore 9 Forms. Step 1, create the Sitecore item. So under Forms in the Sitecore settings, talking to the developers right now, you have the ability to drill down to the settings and see the form settings. All of your submit actions are actually listed under submit actions, and you can click on a submit action. And then notice the fields. We really have 3 fields that we're going to be looking at: the model type, the error message, and the editor. Now, if you open the editor, you're going to see that there's actually a handful of editors already available. You have trigger goal, you have trigger campaign activity, trigger outcome, send the email campaign message, and redirect to a message. Step 2 is we're going to actually create our submit action. Now, you'll notice on the previous slide, we had a model type. I'll flip back to model type. Model type is really going to be the exact code with the library attached to it, or just not the library, the exact code, where you're going to create your submit action. Here's an example of one, the trigger goal action. It's inheriting from a class called Analytics Action Base with a goal action data as our construct. We'll get into that a little bit later. And really, we're just overriding one method. It's going to be the execute method, and you can see in this particular example, we're returning a Boolean value based on whether or not the current tracker was able to register a goal. So all this is doing, current tracker is registering a goal and making sure that the reference ID is not empty. If both those two things happen, then this returns a true and everybody's happy. Now, you might notice our base class. This particular base class is called the Analytics Action Base class. There's 2 that you need to be aware of. There's the Analytics Action Base and there's the Submit Action Base. The only difference between these 2 is that Analytics Action Base provides you a property that has the analytics tracker already built into it. Both need a model. Both of the action bases need a model. A model is really just a simple class that down the road is just going to inherit JSON. It's going to deserialize into a model from a JSON construct, and that's going to provide the data. Last, overriding the execute, like I already said. Step 3 is we're going to update the submit action item. So you'll see that we have our model type, we've put in our error message, but we still have the editor field that we need to select. Well, what about this editor field? Leave blank, because this is going to be a speak dialog. Now, I don't know about you guys, but did I just say speak? Because when I hear the word speak, this is how I feel. No! All right, the reality is, yes, all of Forms Builder was built as a speak application. So if we want to create some nice editor tools wrapped around it, we got to dip into speak. So I'm going to try to really make this a simplified approach because at the end of the day, it is really simple to add in this update, this editor field for a submit action. So our editor field is needed, or let me rephrase. The editor field is only needed when you need to collect input from the form builder or you're passing parameters to your action. Again, it's only needed if you're doing those two things. If you're only doing something like saving data or redirecting to a page, we don't need to really know, maybe the redirect to the page, but the save data is a straight function. It doesn't need properties. It's just going to save data and you're good. So you don't need an editor for that one. But for this one, we're updating the contact with fields from the form. That means that we need to be able to have some kind of connection that the content author can use to select a form to a field value. So I'm going to try to ease you in to speak a little bit. So we're going to create the editor action dialog box. In the demo, I'm going to walk through how I created a Speak UI items to actually create the update contact dialog box that we're going to see later on. In a nutshell, you're going to create the action item, create some page settings, add some title information, connect a map contact form component where we're going to list some fields, and we're going to create a style sheet. We're also going to create a text box data source for messages that might get passed back to the author. Step 5 of creating this custom submit action is going to be going back to your created submit action item and specifying your editor that you just created. See how fast that was? Okay, maybe not that much fast. We'll get into the demo. So the next part, once our save action is complete, we've selected our editor and we've saved that item. For the most part, that's done. We, as developers, we've created that submit action. So at this point, the power turns to the content author who has the ability to actually create a Sitecore form. So in this example, and authors, pay attention if I haven't already lost you, creating a Sitecore form is as simple as going into the forms action off the Launchpad and hitting the create button and saying blank form. Step 2, we're going to drag some elements onto this form. In the demo, you're going to see me create a section, add some fields, add a submit action. It's really simple. It takes literally 5 minutes to create a form. And in step 3, we're going to add our submit action that we just created. You can see here our custom submit action that we just created in the previous slides now shows up under our drop list, and we're going to be able to select that, and we're going to save the form. Also, we're going to edit the properties before we save the form of the dialog box. So that's a quick introduction. You're going to see more in the demo on Sitecore 9 Forms. Next, I really want to give a brief introduction on Sitecore 9 xConnect. Now, I'm going to go ahead and preface this with the fact that xConnect is a big system. There's a lot of documentation that Sitecore has amazingly written, thank you, Martina, amazingly written that really gives developers what they need to learn how to use xConnect. So at a glance, our xConnect is a service layer API that really connects Sitecore, which is the content management, content delivery services, to an xConnect server that then processes and exposes the Sitecore Experience Database, or as we like to call it, XDB. So the xConnect provides a client that Sitecore is going to use. I'll show you what that looks like. But first, let's talk about Sitecore xConnect at a glance. What are the differences? Well, first off, the big major difference that I don't even put on this slide is that xConnect doesn't exist in 8.2. xConnect is brand new to Sitecore 9. In 8.2, Sitecore had direct access to XDB, meaning, hey, you want to connect to the processing pipeline, you want to connect to the tracker, you just call those methods and Sitecore can get directly to it. The tracker API could be edited directly. The problem is that it's very hard to actually integrate and do customizations at the XDB level. It really required interfacing with Sitecore and creating some of those custom controls, which actually presented some architecture scaling opportunities. So Sitecore looked at this and said, okay, we got to re-architect this and come up with a better way. And they did. xConnect is that better way. What xConnect is not, it is not XDB. As I said, it's actually a service layer to XDB. Sitecore CM and CD roles no longer have direct access to XDB. It requires Sitecore itself to instantiate a client so that it can actually talk to the xConnect server. And then the tracker is actually a consumer of XDB data, and the reporting database and the reporting role provides analytics to Sitecore. As I said, xConnect has an extensive API that allows us to register really any kinds of events, interactions, modify contacts, and it really opens a lot of doors when we start talking about IoT. Most of all, it really provided that enterprise scaling option that we were looking for, where we can really scale out XDB as well as xConnect services for millions of interactions. So that client that I was talking about, when we're talking about extending the submit action, the first thing I want to show you is step one here. We're instantiating a client for xConnect. So you'll see that my using context, developers pay attention, by the way, because I just stepped into developer speak. We're instantiating a client of service. Now that we've instantiated it, we're going to create a contact identification reference. We're going to identify ourselves to the tracker, which means this is actually how we identify a contact, which is step 3. We're going to expand some options. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to set our contact facet fields, and then we're going to submit. Step 6 here, the submit is very important. We have a client that we're creating some controls with. We need to make sure we have the submit action that tells xConnect that we're actually submitting, or that tells the client that we're submitting it to xConnect. That's a really fast introduction to xConnect. We'll get more into it in the demo. So the last part really of this is the component personalization. This is really just a review, because at this point, by the time we've created our form and we've identified the contact, which is part of the save submit or the submit action on our form, at the end of the day, next is really just component personalization, where we're going to be able to select our components in the experience editor and put on some personalization. So just as a review, the real ask here is we're going to create a form. That's what the content authors are doing. We're going to identify a contact. Well, that's what the devs are doing by use of a custom submit action that we're going to create that the content authors can choose. And lastly, we're going to personalize some components. So get ready, because it is demo time. So we're going to flip over to your nice website that you bought from Sitecore. Here it is, my simple Sitecore site. To be honest, I'm not a front-end developer. I'm the least creative person you can possibly find. So for the purposes of this demo, I am actually using Sitecore stock website, or web page that comes with Sitecore. You're welcome. So this is your simple Sitecore site. Your product owner has said, hey, we want to put a form on here. We want to identify some contacts. We want to do some personalization. So the next thing we're going to do is actually flip over to Sitecore. We've logged in. I'm going to make sure I'm still logged in. And I'm not, so we're going to log in. And here we have the Sitecore Experience Platform. So we're going to break things down into 3 pieces. First one is the forms. So as a content author, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, hey, I want to create a form. Now, we're going to walk through this. I already have one already built, but we're going to walk through this just to show you how simple this really is. So I'm going to click on the Create button here, and I'm going to click on Blank Form. You'll notice that Blank Form highlights in blue, and suddenly the page refreshes and you have your nice shiny new form. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do here. First one, under settings, is really setting the form styles and setting the form name. So I can go in here under CSS name and I can say, this is my form style. And if I wanted to, I can create a thumbnail, select a thumbnail that's going to show up in Sitecore. And then after you do everything, make sure you hit the apply button. So this is my new form. I'm going to drag some design elements on here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to drag a section. All this section is saying, hey, this is a container that's going to contain certain fields. When I click on that section, I can choose my field name. So really this is just section. I can also style my classes here. So we'll call this contact information, and we're going to call this my contact form section. Now again, I'm not a front-end developer, so I'm just filling in to show you guys that you can specify your own CSS classes with this. And we're going to hit the apply button. Make sure that after you do everything in the right panel, you're always clicking the apply button. So now that we have our section, I'm going to drag some fields onto it. So we're going to go up here, we're going to drag a single line text field, and we're going to put in our section. And I'm going to click on it, and now we get some additional fields. So I'm going to call this label, we're going to call it first name, and we're going to give it a field name of first name. And we're going to give it a default value. No, I'm not going to give it a default value. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a placeholder text. I'm going to say, enter your first name. And now we're going to create our style around that form. If we wanted it, we can create a label, CSS class for the label. And then we're going to hit apply. Now, lather, rinse, repeat. We're going to do this really quickly. Lather, rinse, repeat for the 3 fields. So we're going to do last name, and we're going to hit and then placeholder text, and we're going to apply. And last but not least, we're going to have an email field. Now, they actually have a specific field for email as a form element, and this is because we want to actually apply some validation so that we know we're getting at least somewhat of a semblance of an email address in through the form. So now we're going to create the label as email address. And we're going to just name the field email. That's what it is already. And we're going to put some placeholder text of enter an email, proper grammar. And we're going to hit apply. All right, I've just created my form. Now, there's one more thing that you always need to add on to your form, and that is a submit action or a button. So we're on under structure. You can see there's a form element called submit button. I'm going to just drag it. We're going to put it under our section, drag it on, and then I'm going to click on it, and you'll see we get some labels. So I'm going to say submit contact information. My field name on this is just going to be submit button. I'm going to be real creative. And you also have the ability to actually select a navigation step. Say you have a multi-part form. Well, my submit button, I only want it to really go to the next form, and that's what you can do with these navigation steps. You can just say next previous. For this particular form example, I just want to make sure I submit the form so that the navigation step is actually submit. And again, you can create some CSS styles. So lastly, I'm going to hit the apply button, and then we're going to click back on here. The last thing in the form as a content author you're going to want to do is you want to make sure you assign some actions to this form so that when somebody fills it out, we actually do something with it. So this is where the content author would say, hey, I don't have an action to actually save contact details. Can I get an action to save contact? That becomes the story that the developer needs to develop. So we're going to save our form. I'm going to hit save up here. And because it was a new form, we get to give it a name. So I'm going to call it the Sitecore Virtual Sug. And we're going to hit save. Sitecore does some Ajaxy stuff. Form was successfully saved. And now when we go back, if all of our indexes are aligned, you'll see that we now have a new form, Sitecore Virtual Sug. This is the form that we created. So we're going to drop back, go into developer mode here. And the next thing we're going to do is actually walk through creating that submit action. So as a developer, what we're going to do is flip to the core database. I'm sorry, not the core database, the master database. And we're going to do content editor. And we're going to go down here to system and then settings and forms. So all of your form information is actually stored in the settings of the Sitecore on the master database. So you have your field types. That's what was defining the field that you saw on the left-hand column. But here we have our submit actions. And so we're going to right-click on submit action, and we're going to actually say submit action. Now, I've already got one created. This was the custom submit action that we were talking about during the demo. And you can see that I've already got a model type, put in an error message, and then an editor. So we're going to quickly look at one that I've already created, which is identify contact. So here I've already created a model type called trigger identify contact, and we've selected the editor of update contact. But in this case, we haven't actually created the editor yet. So how do we create the editor? Well, it's time to drop into Visual Studio. So when we're in Visual Studio, the first thing we want to do is let's create this dialog. Like I said, it's Speak. So in order to develop in Speak, you actually need to do it in Visual Studio with Sitecore Rocks installed. I'm not going to go through how to set all that up. But now that we've kind of set that level, here we have Sitecore Explorer for Sitecore Rocks opened, and I've already drilled into the core database. Very important, this is the core database. And you're going to be able to find this under the, what you're looking for is the Forms Builder. So you're going to be able to find this under Sitecore Client Applications and Form Builder. So creating a new Speak component really is as simple as right-clicking on Actions and saying New. Tasks. Add. Sorry, I was looking. We're going to say Add New Item. And we're going to add. Now, this is how I do it. I look at one that's already created and I say, what's the template type? So this is a Speak-based page. That's really what we're going to be creating. So I'm going to go Action, Add, New Item, Speak-based page. And there it is, Speak-based page. And we're going to give it a name. So we're going to call it the Form Contact Details. We're going to say OK. Now, I'm not going to sit here and create all these items, but that's an example of how all these work. So then what I have here already created is Update Contact. Update Contact is the Speak form that I went through and created that has all of the fields. So after you create your form, your Speak-based page, which is in this case is the Form Contact Details, the next thing you're going to create is a Page Settings item. Page Settings is really just that doesn't have any settings on it, but has settings under it. So create the page setting item, and then what you're going to do is you're going to create a series of text fields. These text fields are header subtitle, header title, and value not in list. This is going to give our form some, at least a little introduction so that the content author can actually see some wording, understand what they're supposed to do. So you can see that these items are the text parameter value, and we have 3 of them. So header, subtitle, value not in list. The next thing we're going to create is a style sheet. The style sheet really all it is a page style sheet file that has a link to a CSS that exists somewhere in the file system. So for this particular style sheet, we're actually going to be using the Actions CSS class that comes with Sitecore. And then the last thing, but most important thing, is we're actually going to create our map contact form. So the map contact form is a folder that contains our fields. These are the 3 fields that we want to pull from the form and actually save or do something with it with our submit action. So we're mapping the contact form and we're pulling the first name, last name, and email address. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these items specifically. So we're going to close this stuff. When we look at one of these contact forms, say first name, for example, what we're really looking at, first off, is we want the value field name to be item ID and the display name field to be name. This is really just coming from the actual Sitecore item to say, okay, well, the value field name is going to be item ID, which is going to hold the GUID, and the display name field is what's going to show the name coming from the Sitecore item. But more importantly, is there a section called Form. Form has a form label. So this is our form label, and this is the form label that the content authors are going to see where they're selecting, okay, well, if I have a first name, what is my form field that I need to use to map? This is a map. And then the next 2 important things are really the binding configuration and the selected value. Backing all of this is a lot of JavaScript, which is why this binding configuration is important. Selected value is actually the name of the property on the form control that has, for the option that shows, okay, what is my selected value for this form field? And then first name, field ID, you can name this whatever you want, just to make sure you name it something that you can remember. This name becomes very important soon. So you can create that 3 times. We have one for first name, one for last name, and one for email address. And these settings are pretty simple. Form label, binding configuration, selected value, just make sure it says selected value. And then you can also trigger whether or not you want the content author to have the field as required. Well, because I'm setting first name, last name, and email, I want them to make sure that they're attaching the form field to this field because I'm expecting it. So I have all 3 of these fields as required. So once you've created your item structure, and it really is as simple as what Sitecore does, you right-click on the parent item, you add your item. Some of these have a couple different types, but for the most part, it's really just text parameters. And then these fields are actually form drop list parameters. So once you have your items created here, then the real magic is in the design layout. And this is why you have to use Sitecore Rocks, is because the design layout that's used in the presentation properties doesn't necessarily work through Sitecore. So we use Sitecore Rocks to actually design this layout. And what you see is we have really 6 elements that are, you can call them components if you want. We're really looking at renderings and placeholders here. So the first one that we're going to add is called page code. Now, to add a rendering literally is as easy as going up here to page code or to add a rendering, and then you can start to say, okay, well, I'm looking for, say, page code. And of course, let's see here, page code. So page code. And as I type, you'll see that the form editor field actually starts to show. So there's actually 2 that show up for page code, but we want the speak rendering. You can see that Path Analyzer has their own page code. But we're going to add the page code. Once you add that, then it literally just adds the control into the renderings and placeholders, and then you can actually set some values. So the properties for this, we're going to, if you notice, these are just like component properties. The one property that we have is the page script file name. So the page script file name for this particular one points to a JavaScript file. So we're going to get into that here in a second. Last but not least, we enter our titles, we put a border, and then we have an actual component called map contact form, and we set the data source for that contact form to be the data source that we put into the properties. So in a very quick nutshell, I just created a speak page that Sitecore Forms is going to look at. So a lot of this I'm going to have available on my blog. You can come back and actually look and see what I actually did, and I can actually also let you download this particular structure. Okay, so we have our form created. Now the next thing we need to create is our actual action. So here I've already created a, we don't need rocks anymore. So here I've already created our submit action to kind of help speed this process up a little bit. But we're going to walk through it. The first thing I did really, when I talk about what we override, we're really override execute. And this is the meat of where we're at. Change this to 150. And this is really where the meat of everything that we're doing. Your value is going to come in. We're going to execute some data. Where the one thing that needs to be known is that the value of the submit action base, this particular class that you pass in, update contact data, that is the structure that your data that you're coming in from the parameters is going to have. And this is our quick little class. So update contact data, and we have our 3 fields. These are the 3 field names that I set up on the speak item, and I said we'd come back to that. So, so now that we have our structure, we're going through, we're executing the actual action. So we have a function here where we can say get field by ID based on just the data coming in, which is our model, versus the form submit context, which is the form itself. We're mapping the fields, and we're getting our value for first name field, last name field, and email address. Now, I have a little bit of a buffer in here. If any of these fields are empty, because I want to require everything, then we're going to return false. Obviously, you can be as lenient as you need to when you're building this. Next, we're really instantiating that client. So I have a method here called create client. We're going to swap down here real quick. And really all it is Sitecore xConnect client configuration .get client. That's all you got to do to get your client context. And once we have our context and we're actually using it, then we can do some stuff. So the first thing we're doing is we're creating an identified contact reference, and we're actually creating identified email. This is what I chose to use as the tracking identifier for when I'm going to identify a contact. So pre 8.2 or pre 9 in 8.2, it was always just the singular identifier that we would use, and we would use an email address, or we'd use some kind of Sitecore username. With xConnect, we can have multiple different identifiers that we can identify people as. So for this particular one, I'm doing identified email, and I'm getting the value of the email field. And I'm creating that as my email identification. The next thing we're doing is we're actually identifying with the email address to the current tracker. So this used to be currenttracker.session.identify. Now it's currenttracker.session.identify as our source, which is our contact reference, and our actual identifier string. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create contact expand options. Now, because there's a lot of service layer happening, we don't necessarily need the entire full contact object getting transferred from xConnect into Sitecore. So what we can do is we can create contact expand options that say, hey, we only want these facets that we're going to be utilizing. So for instance, for this particular example, we want the personal information, which is going to set our first name and last name, and we want the email address list so that we can set an email address. Next, we're going to actually use the client to get our contact, and we do that by client.get. We send in our identification object, and then we send in our expand options object. Next is set fields. So I've created some helper methods, but really at the end of the day, we're setting these fields for personal information and set email. And to show you kind of what that code looks like, it's literally just as simple as taking the facet, contact.personal, setting our first name field in the facet, and then using the client, because we need the client, to set that personal contact facet. And then we do the same thing with email. The only thing that we do different with email is because they're filling this email in as a form, and maybe sometime down the road we want to be able to send an email to that form, so then we would use that as a preferred. And we have this as the preferred email address, and we set the SMTP address. Last but not least, we submit our client, and then if everything works, we return true. If everything doesn't work, then we actually return false. All right, so you compile that, you deploy that, your actual submit action is now done. So we're going to go back to, as a content author, we're going to go back to the content author, and we're going to say, okay, so I'm going to go back to my form. My developer says the save action is done, and we're going to use that form. So clicking on here, going down to my submit actions, and you can see we have custom submit, identify contact, and we actually have a couple others. So we're going to click on my identify contact one, which I have prepared, and you can see that we have 3 fields that show up. These are all the fields that I created. This is your header title, this is your subtitle, and you can see that these are all required. So we're going to select first name, we're going to select last name, and we're going to select email address. And you're going to press OK. So now that those forms are set, I'm going to click Save, and my actual job is done. Actually, no, we have one more thing we're going to do. We also need to trigger a goal. So, so we want to trigger a goal. And if you don't have the goal already created, you can go ahead and create it. I'm going to just choose the one I already selected, which is contact info form field. And now we're going to trigger a goal. We're going to identify the contact, because I forgot to hit save. And we're also going to save some data. And we're also going to redirect the page. And when we redirect the page, we really just want to go to the same page so that it does a quick refresh. And we're going to say the home page. So we've applied all of those. I'm going to go back and make sure. And the last thing we're going to do is actually some ordering. The very first thing I want to do is actually identify my contacts. So we're going to hit the up arrow. Once the contact is identified, we can trigger our goal, we can save the data, and we can redirect to the page. And with that, we're done with our form. We're going to save. All right. So now that my form is out there, you can see that my other demo form that we created looks the same way. We have 3 fields in our custom submit action, and you can also see that we have our actions here. So now what we need to do is I need to add this form to a page. So I'm going to go into our content editor, and I'm going to go to the experience editor for this home item, and we're going to add a form. So component, add here. We're going to add our MVC form. We're going to select our virtual demo. And you can see our form shows up in all of its glorious formatting. We're going to add some personalization. So if the form is default, we want it to show. We want to add in a if goal is triggered. We're going to edit the rule and type in goal. During this current visit, if the goal of contact info form is field, then I want to hide the form component. And we're going to say OK. Then on the other side of the coin is we want to show something different. So under the sample rendering for personalization, which I already have set up here, you can see that we are actually, if our goal is completed, we're showing different presentation, and otherwise we're showing the default. And this is an example of how you can actually have a different component as part of personalization. So we're going to hit save, and we're going to publish. I can never remember where the publish item is. There we go. We're going to publish. Item updated. And now we're going to go back to our lovely little website. And here I am. I'm going to refresh the page. And you're going to see our form is here. Now, if the demo gods are willing, I'm going to put in my name, Pete Navarra at sitecorehacker.com. And you know what? I want to subscribe to your newsletter. So we're going to say submit contact information. And with just a click of a button, congratulations, you did it. World's best coffee. Anybody get the reference? Anyways, this is it. We filled out a form. We saved some data. We identified the contact. We triggered a goal. And, well, we changed our personalization. So that's it. The last thing I'll show you is how fast data gets entered. Keep in mind, XDB is processing as we're talking right now. When I go to my experience profile, you're going to actually see, well, God's willing, that here it is, Pete Navarra. This is my contact. My instance is probably a little bit slower, but basically you would see that I created a personalization event. I had a page view. Give you an idea of what this actually is going to look like is one of these guys. And you're going to actually see that on our timeline, you can see that we filled out the form. We have the page events, the goal. The reason why it's not immediately showing up is because I still have my contact session. So if I go over here and I close this page, probably in about 30 seconds, we're going to see that get into my contact profile because of sessioning. But on a user that's already gone through, you're going to see we triggered our goal. We have our page events. We have our page view. And the next time that I come back, as long as I've kept my cookie, then the next time I come back, I'm going to see the congratulations again. So with that, the demo is over. You know, when this is deployed, the product owner will be like, yeah, we did it. The content authors will be like, yes, I can finally do this on my own without having to have as much involvement by the developers. And the developers will be like, yay, this is simple. It really is simple. So I hope that you have enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Pete Navarra again. You can email me at pete@sitecorehacker.com. You can also find my blog at www.sitecorehacker.com. Find me on Twitter at sitecorehacker.com. And come join the community at sitecorechat.slack.com or sitecore.stackexchange.com. If you have questions about anything you've seen here, post your question to Sitecore.Stack Exchange, and myself or one of the other many Sitecore developers monitoring Stack Exchange will take a look. So with that, thank you very much for attending this session, and I hope you enjoy your day.